Chapter 4, Section 3, Outsourcing to an entity not licensed by APEGA. When APEGA licensed professionals or permit holders outsource professional services to an entity not licensed by APEGA, they must exercise due diligence. This includes developing and documenting, in advance, a thorough outsourcing plan for each professional service to be provided. For permit holders, the process to develop an outsourcing plan must be described in their professional practice management plan. Should an APEGA licensed professional or permit holder require multiple or frequent professional services for a specific scope of work from the same outsourced entity, professional judgment must be used by the outsourcing entity to determine whether a separate outsourcing plan is required each time. What is most important is that the permit holder or licensed professional ensures that all of the requirements described in this section are met. All outsourcing plans must include and document 7 key requirements. We will now go through each of these requirements. The first requirement is the scope of work, which must include the following 4 components. 1. Describe the required professional service, including all technical and functional requirements. 2. Describe the scope of work boundaries, including whether the outsourced entity is permitted to undertake subsequent outsourcing, and if so, define the scope of work for subsequent outsourcing. 3. List the professional work products that will be created by the outsourced entity and ensure that all professional work products to be used in Alberta are authenticated and validated in compliance with the APEGA Authenticating Professional Work Products standard. And 4. The plan must list the work products the outsourced entity will rely on, including those provided by the outsourcing entity, such as preliminary engineering work. The second requirement of the outsourcing plan is the process to select the outsourced entity. This process must assess 5 key areas. 1. Previous experience demonstrating competency to provide the professional services defined in the scope of work. 2. Professional reputation, including checking for any circumstance where concerns to the safety of infrastructure, the environment, or the public may have previously been brought forward. 3. The quality control and assurance processes for performing engineering or geoscience work. 4. Knowledge of Alberta and Canadian statutes and regulations, APEGA standards, and all other applicable statutes, regulations, bylaws, standards, and codes. And 5. The outsourced entity's plan for the procurement, management, and quality control of any further outsourcing or subcontracting of professional services related to the defined scope of work. The third requirement of the outsourcing plan is due diligence in authentication and validation of professional work products. Licensed professionals and permit holders must ensure that outsourced professional work products are authenticated by APEGA licensed professionals and validated by responsible members, in accordance with the APEGA Authenticating Professional Work Products standard. The outsourcing plan must clearly identify the licensed professionals and responsible members assigned these responsibilities. This requirement applies under all circumstances, even when the outsourcing entity does not have the in-house expertise to authenticate the professional work products. If an outsourcing entity has in-house expertise in the scope of the outsourced work, they can authenticate and take professional responsibility for professional work products created by the outsourced entity. In these circumstances, the outsourcing entity must either provide direct supervision and control over the work or conduct a thorough review of the work as described in Chapters 2 and 3 of this training. If the outsourcing entity is a permit holder, the professional work products must also be validated by a responsible member. When an outsourcing entity does not have the in-house expertise to take professional responsibility for the professional work products produced by an entity not licensed by APEGA, the outsourcing entity must provide adequate due diligence to ensure that the professional work products are authenticated and validated, in accordance with the APEGA Authenticating Professional Work Products standard. In these situations, the outsourcing entity can use one of the following 3 approaches. 1. Have the outsourced entity obtain a permit to practice from APEGA so it can deliver authenticated and validated professional work products. 2. Outsource the authentication and validation of the professional work products to another entity licensed by APEGA. 3. Provide training to a licensed professional working under the outsourcing entity's permit to practice or sole proprietorship, enabling that licensed professional to provide either direct supervision and control or conduct a thorough review, and then authenticate and take professional responsibility for the professional work products. The fourth outsourcing plan requirement is compliance obligations. All compliance obligations must be communicated and accepted by both the outsourcing entity and the outsourced entity, including relevant statutes, regulations, bylaws, standards, codes, and APEGA practice standards. Project-specific requirements, including regulatory and permit requirements. And local environmental and design conditions and constraints. The fifth outsourcing plan requirement is quality control and assurance. The outsourcing entity must document the due diligence undertaken to ensure that professional work products or professional services procured from an outsourced entity not licensed by APEGA are created following adequate quality control and assurance processes that are acceptable to the outsourcing entity. The sixth outsourcing plan element is a management of change process. The outsourcing entity must ensure the outsourcing plan includes an adequate, acceptable, and documented management of change process related to the scope of outsourced work, and that it will be followed. This includes the process for how changes are appropriately authenticated and validated, in accordance with the APEGA Authenticating Professional Work Products standard. The change process must identify how the outsourced entity will be engaged in making changes to professional work products that occur during field implementation. The seventh and final outsourcing plan element is the interface management process. When multiple outsourced entities are engaged in a project, an adequate interface management process must be in place and followed to mitigate risks. The interface management process must describe the responsibilities of the outsourcing entity, the responsibilities of each outsourced entity, protocols to manage changes in the scope of work of each outsourced entity that may affect the work of another outsourced entity, the procedure for integrating multiple professional work products in accordance with APEGA's Authenticating Professional Work Products standard. When a permit holder or licensed professional is outsourcing directly to multiple outsourced entities, that permit holder or licensed professional is responsible to develop and manage the interface management process. If interface management itself is being outsourced, the entity to which it is outsourced is responsible to manage the process. In all cases, it is the outsourcing entity's responsibility to ensure the process exists and is followed, and that the final integrated professional work products are authenticated and validated. We will now review two examples. Example number 1.
Acme Oil and Gas is an APEGA permit holder that owns and operates an extraction plant in Alberta. To improve operations, the company needs to add a complex fired heater designed to meet its specific needs. Acme Oil and Gas assigns RIA, a mechanical engineer and responsible member at Acme Oil and Gas, to oversee the project. The fired heater will need to be imported from an international supplier with the expertise to customize the fired heater to the specifications of Acme Oil and Gas. What are the obligations of RIA and Acme Oil and Gas to comply with APEGA standards? Since the design and construction will be outsourced to an entity that is not licensed by APEGA, RIA must create and follow an outsourcing plan. We will now review the outsourcing plan that RIA created and followed. First, RIA defined the scope of work. This included all technical and functional requirements for the design and manufacture of the fired heater, the boundaries of the work, and a list of professional work products that would be created by the outsourced entity. She then sent a request for proposals to a list of established and qualified vendors with proven track records in designing and manufacturing complex fired heaters. The request for proposals described the scope of work, including the specifications for the design and manufacturing of the fired heater, including detailed technical and functional requirements, limitations in subcontracting any elements of the design, a list of professional work products the vendor must generate for authentication and validation by Acme Oil and Gas, descriptions of documentation that will be available to the vendor, including preliminary designs for the fired heater. Once all proposals were received, RIA carefully reviewed them using and documenting appropriate due diligence to compare the submissions based on their experience in designing custom fired heaters, professional reputation and references, description of the quality control processes of their firm, demonstrated knowledge of or approach to learning the applicable statutes and regulations, confirmation that subsequent outsourcing will not be required. She recommended core manufacturing in Korea based on its experience, reputation, knowledge, competency, and proven ability to design complex fired heaters. The company employed specialty fired heater engineers who were licensed in that jurisdiction. RIA assigned Ron, an APEGA licensed professional at Acme Oil and Gas, who has expertise and experience in standard fired heaters and many other complex mechanical equipment, to provide direct supervision and control over the work done by core manufacturing. Ron was responsible to authenticate the professional work products created by core manufacturing in accordance with the Acme Oil and Gas Professional Practice Management Plan. To meet his obligations as a licensed professional, Ron ensured that all compliance requirements were met. This included making sure that core manufacturing was aware of and understood the international and Canadian codes and regulatory and environmental standards for the use of fired heaters in northern Alberta's cold climate. He also regularly reviewed the work done by core manufacturing and ensured that throughout the project, they utilized processes for quality control and assurance that were adequate and acceptable to Acme Oil and Gas. Ron followed the requirements for direct supervision and control specified in the APEGA practice standard, relying on the work of others and outsourcing. Upon completion of the project, Ron was able to authenticate the professional work products based on his direct supervision and control throughout the design, manufacturing, and testing of the fired heaters. After authenticating the professional work products, he sent them to RIA, the responsible member in his division, for validation in accordance with the APEGA standard, authenticating professional work products. During the installation of the fired heater in the plant environment, it was determined that a modification to the original technical design was needed. In accordance with the management of change process developed for the project, Ron contacted core manufacturing to discuss the recommended change and the approach. The change was made during installation of the fired heater. Immediately following the change, Ron documented and then authenticated the revisions to the previously authenticated professional work product. Next, he sent the authenticated revisions to RIA for validation. An interface management process is not applicable to this example because multiple outsourced entities were not engaged in the project.
Example number 2.
Best Corporation North, an APEGA permit holder, is the Alberta subsidiary of Best Corporation International, headquartered in the United States. Best Corporation North requires a customized process control system for its operations in northern Alberta. They have one electrical engineer, Cheryl, who is knowledgeable about control systems but does not have the specialized engineering expertise required to design the customized system. Best Corporation International, located in Houston, Texas, has engineers with the necessary expertise and experience needed to design the customized control system for the Alberta facility. However, the Houston-based engineers are not licensed by APEGA to practice engineering in Alberta. What options does Best Corporation North have to enable them to comply with APEGA standards, recognizing that the imported design must be authenticated and validated using APEGA protocols? Best Corporation North has three options. The first option is for the parent company in Houston to obtain a permit to practice from APEGA, and for the engineers with the required expertise to obtain APEGA licenses so that they can authenticate and validate the professional work products. The second option is for Best Corporation North to outsource the authentication and validation of the professional work products to another entity licensed by APEGA. The third option is for Best Corporation North to send Cheryl, the electrical engineer who has knowledge of control systems, to Houston for training in the specialized area of work. Once trained, Cheryl will have the knowledge required to either provide direct supervision and control of the work or to conduct a thorough review of the work so that she can authenticate the resulting professional work products and provide them to a responsible member for validation.